Hi, this is Jorah here on the Balefire Phoenix channel, making the first video featuring actual content, finally. I have plans to make this a daily thing from here on out, so look forward to that if you enjoy this. Today's video is titled Paths to Power. The fundamentals of this is heavily covered in Chinese philosophy of the cardinal directions. Spoiler alert, the Phoenix is one of them. And my friend Peter, who I plan to have on a segment starting tomorrow, is one as well, but he's a dragon. Another one you might have heard the basics of is if you're a big Naruto fan. They represent the 6 paths of pain, as well as the philosophy of love and hatred, but they take it from less of a Chinese perspective and more of a Buddhist and Shinto perspective. They have plenty of articles written online about it, which aren't that long, so they're a definite must-read for anyone who's interested, because they're short and to the point. And I mean, I really hate reading, especially when it comes to philosophy and personal prattle. How I should live my life has always been a road walked alone type of deal. Except, perhaps, in the ways of love. So I'm not really into the whole looking to the past for knowledge thing. I've always cared more for the future. But like I was saying, this stuff is really well put, even by my modern millennial ADD standards. Speaking of ADD, if you don't like run-on sentences or me just generally getting sidetracked, you might have a problem with some of my stuff. Teachers have been telling me that for years, but it always seems to add some sort of flow to my writing. So I never pick up on it as a mistake. And I always saw it as a good thing, if at all, so I left it in there and took the mild point loss. Still finished high school with straight A's, so what do they know, right? Anyway, enough of my own personal shit, here's the content. There are 3 paths to power, 3 things to spend your raw determination on. Love, hate, and pain. This is also the order people in today's society tend to use those things to get things done in life. Since pain and hatred are always ostracized and left out, let's start with them. Pain. People always misunderstand pain, even in the most basic forms. It's even commonplace for people to use pain and suffering interchangeably. This is a huge mistake on people's parts, so let me clear that up before we start. Let me tell you just what pain is exactly. Pain is a motivational tool. It can be a way of life. For example, people who use and people who like to be used. But beyond BDSM stuff, slavery is a good example of how pain can be used to accomplish even the impossible feat of building pyramids and wonders of the world, despite living in such barren wastelands like the desert. You can make all the moral objections you want, but for a wonder of the world that is the pyramids, it really justifies those sacrifices that were made. Nobody favors pain as a way of life anymore, so don't worry about slavery becoming the next big trend. But for what it was, I think people give it a bad rap. The next important thing about pain is how it differs from suffering. Pain is a motivator. But suffering is useless pain. It's pain without gain. You can argue a whip to the back makes slaves work faster or harder, but the nature of suffering is so much worse. It doesn't even motivate. As I like to say, lost potential is to science, as suffering is to pain. That's a good way to remember it. There are many different useful types of pain. I've mentioned a few, and for further reference, an interesting bit is the Naruto interpretation of the 6 Buddhist paths of reincarnation. Doom also does some interesting stuff on pain to a lesser extent, and a brief overview of Doom is not only existential suffering of knowing your impending demise, but it's also suffering that is yet to come that you can't do anything about specifically. Next up, we have hatred. Another path that has a really bad reputation, especially lately with the whole troll uprising thing and the beta uprising thing. School shootings and just generally being an asshole to people on the internet doesn't tend to get a lot of things done as a collective. It started to get better, I noticed, when I was out of middle school, maybe like 9 years ago. But lately, even the fat neckbeards, like the Amazing Atheist and his army of losers, have been highly critical of other people who use hatred. It's like even people who should be on their side from at least a fundamental level, being that of hatred, have really conflated egos about each other. I would expect some kind of armistice to be had between people, society basically just outcasts for being abnormal for the sake of it, but they are really getting into the whole ostracized back kind of thing, and it's not getting them very far. And I don't mean to get self-righteous about the whole thing, but I mean it's really starting to get obnoxious. I can't watch a lot of that content anymore because this stuff keeps popping up, and it's really just disinteresting, and it makes me feel bad for associating with them. For people who spend half of their time wallowing in self-pity and the other half with a conflated ego, they spend really a lot of that time just being useless assholes. What a waste of potential. That ego and confidence would be so much better spent towards social activities, where they could have broken the cycle. But for people who are supposedly so smart, just accepting your place in the society you hate really doesn't seem like much of a power play to me. I'm not going to go too far on that note, for fear of being mistaken as self-righteous or even shaming, which would invalidate my criticism of them in their eyes, so let's just move on. When I think of hatred as a motivator, I think of the gym. Rage against the machine, that kind of thing. Hatred really lets me power through the pain of my muscles ripping and rehealing over and over again. The most common misunderstanding about the path of hatred is that people always think someone's hatred is directed, usually at them or society or a group they love, which tends to give them a poor view of them, which is a common occurrence, sure. There are plenty of people who will use directed hatred, usually for negative or nefarious purposes, but that belief really just serves to increase the amount of people who feel that way, without really accomplishing anything productive. So, if you're like that, cut it out. I use hatred and spite towards more than just other people. It's not like a directed thing for me, like workout machines or facts of life that I want to overcome instead of learn to cope with. Speaking of cope with, love, the third path to power and the most common one, is the best path for coping. If you face a harsh fact of reality like death or circumstance, nothing does it better than love. Love of friends, families, dogs, or even inanimate objects like teddy bears, heirlooms, or media. Love is the best mechanism you can have for living, really. It's the most common path to power among modern day people, and I use it more than the other paths by a considerable amount. It's a pretty safe bet if you're a person, or sorry, if the person you are trying to help doesn't look like they belong in a dungeon somewhere, working on evil schemes, or even as a prisoner. Love is the best bet to their admiration. I can't really get you started on love philosophy because there's so much, but in my experience, I was a little slow to hop on the whole love philosophy thing because a lot of the media and previous writings I found on love never really related to me much. But man, was I wrong. Once I found some more relatable media, and I found out what I think personally what it means to love, I'm really a totally different person in that regard. So if I were to give advice to someone, it would be that being stunted because you dislike love or are uninterested even is a big mistake, and you're probably going to regret it later. That covers the basics, and I wish you luck on your paths. Feel free to drop out here if you don't like specifics, but here's some more stuff I know about power in a less fundamental and more basic way. Money. Currency is the most basic form of power, besides the fundamentals, of course. I think fundamentals are like the foundations for a house, brick and mortar kind of stuff, logs for a cabin. But money is like the drywall and the doors and the utilities like running water and electricity. Still pretty damn important. But if you want a cabin in the woods that you just want to go relax at during the summer, you really don't need anything but the fundamentals, you know? I'm a huge fan of neutral or unaligned philosophy. So expect a lot of nature, architecture, building, time, theoretical physics, and to a lesser extent science as a whole as huge favorite examples of mine. Another callback to Eastern philosophy is with the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. This is probably by far my favorite philosophy learning tool. Romance of the Three Kingdoms is also known as the game Dynasty Warriors, and it's a book basically outlining the 300-year war that China had to decide between capitalism socialism, and a focus on culture. If you can obtain these three things, you'll understand what power means from a Chinese perspective: fortune, friends, and fame. If you can obtain these three things, there's no limit to your success. Fortune, for the most part, means money, as well as things you can trade for money, and luck, like birthright and circumstance. Friends, or allies as I call it, but I don't really call it that for lack of alliteration, are people you can depend on to back up your claims for power, and friends for support. Fame is how many people know your name, usually with positive implications, but tyrants known for the fear they inspire in people's hearts have also been quite successful, albeit usually for shorter periods of time. Especially nowadays, you pretty much have to live in far-off lands to get away with that kind of stuff. The armies of the United Nations, and the US specifically, reach pretty far, and they don't really let anyone get away with that kind of stuff. I kind of thought I would elaborate more on this kind of stuff, but you know what, I think that pretty much covers everything important. You will find out the finer details while you walk your own path, I'm sure, but if you want to be more powerful, fame, friends, and fortune is what you need, and I wish you the best of luck. Love, hateful, or painful, as it may be.